I'm Gregory.
I'm Lawson.
I'm Connor.
And welcome to our first full-length episode.
We're joined by Bureau collaborator Katie.
Hello, I'm Katie. Thank you for having me.
Today we've got 4 great segments planned for you. First, we're going to be talking primarily about the new Syndicate DLC, Jack the Ripper, which has been out for a little while now. We'll be diving into some analysis of Jack the Ripper's character, as well as the new fear mechanic, and also some of the overarching themes of the plot and story.
In addition to that, we have the first installment of a recurring segment called The Kitchen Sink, where we'll be discussing this obscure little indie film you probably haven't heard about, called Star Wars The Force Awakens.
Finally, make sure you check out the Bureau social media accounts. At the moment, you can only follow us on Twitter at Bureau Podcast. But without further ado, let's jump into our character spotlight on Jack the Ripper.
So, I'll go first. Talking about Jack the Ripper, the character himself, the first thing that really jumped out at me when you were playing as him was the screen effects and the UI, and how sort of like a little twisted version of the the murder mysteries and the sort of Sherlock-y like things you have that come all over the place in the investigations. Jack has these, horribly scrawled in bad handwriting, looks like it's scratched into a wall. Writing says, kill him, go get Jacob, do this, kill these people, no witnesses. That just kind of show how crazy and all over the place his thoughts are. And every once in a while, the screen goes absolutely nuts. So I thought this was a great way to handle the character, because between Jacob and Evie, they kind of feel mostly the same to play as. And we can talk about that more, other times. But the point is that with Jack, you absolutely know you're playing as someone who is pretty much insane, because even the sort of reality of the game, this screen which you view everything through, is sort of tearing apart, and it kind of jumps around sometimes and little yellow lines pop through, and the UI just gets kind of wacky. And I really like how they handle that, because I think it establishes, right off the bat, the insanity of Jack through a very easy to understand way. What did you guys think about that?
Yeah, so I think it's very interesting from kind of an in-universe perspective, especially to do with the story and the animus, because it kind of shows that the mental state of a person can affect how the animus shows a memory. There's been some speculation that, for instance, assassins are always mostly, especially, for instance, with Shay and his experiences with the assassins. The assassins in Rogue are almost comically evil compared to how they are in most games, and that could be seen as Shay's mental state and his view of the assassins altering how his memories portray the assassins. And I think that with Jack, it's not straight up memory altering, but it's very clear that there is a visual difference between a sane person with Evie and an insane person with Jack.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree that those little, screen effects were very cool and very different from what I was expecting. The very fact that we were even given the chance to play as Jack at all was kind of crazy and cool in a really interesting way, and I really enjoyed it. I think my only complaint with any of that is I think they should have done just a little bit more with it, because it started to get very repetitive. Because if you were playing as Jack for any length of time, you would just start seeing the exact same messages and screen twisting effects just every 30 seconds, exactly the same. Either there should have been more variety, or they should have been a little more spaced out, less frequent. That probably would have made them more effective, in my opinion.
To me, playing as Jack was not having a fun time, and to me, the glitching that occurred when you're playing as Jack showed how hard it would be to maintain synchronization with him, because there was a huge glitch across the whole screen that made it hard to see, and then it would be rip him, kill him. It just made me think whoever was playing was having a hard time playing as him. And to me, it was kind of like I was playing as a murderous Ted Bundy. So I didn't really have fun playing as him, but I really liked the tone that it put across.
Yeah, one criticism that has been leveled at Jack's character is that his motivation is very murky and his characterization is kind of not quite all there. I think that's a valid criticism on a surface level, but at the same time, I think it'll be hard to fill in that motivation and characterization in a way that would have been respectful to the actual history and what we actually know. I mean, Jack's this horrible serial killer. It's kind of hard to... I mean, it's not an entirely fictional setting, and it's hard to reveal things without seeming somewhat disrespectful to the actual events and the people involved, especially the women he killed. But on the other hand, that they provided any at all might have been a mistake, because it seems like, sure, keeping Jack a mysterious figure is probably the right way to go, but there's this weird halfway thing in their characterization of Jack where you have they bother to name who he is. He's this guy called Jack the Lad, but it's not really compelling when it's done there. So I don't know. It's this weird place between they're trying to make it an interesting reveal and trying to respect the mystery and not give, not making necessarily, this isn't quite the right word, but making light, I guess, of a horrible killer.
I agree. I think his characterization was really off because in all the pre-marketing materials, they set up that there was this whole reveal, like, who is Jack? And then they kind of wrote him off like, oh, yeah, that's Jacob and Jack the Lad. Wonder whatever happened to him. Like, come on. It just seemed so much like they were setting up some big reveal, like they were going to demask him and then, oh, it's you. And then they didn't even bother to demask him at the end. And it wouldn't have even mattered at that point because his character was so nondescript that it's as if, it seems so not there. Like, Jack the Ripper was really the character. There wasn't anyone underneath it. And they were teasing so much of that, like, who's the guy underneath the mask? And then at that point, the mask is just him, which I guess there's some neat thematic elements to that. But I felt like I was misled with, the whole thing of who is Jack, and that never really happened that way.
Yeah, I definitely agree that his characterization was just super murky and that the reveal was really awkward. As soon as Evie's investigating Jacob's house and she sees that picture of, Jacob and Jack the Lad, I'm going, okay, this is the misdirection. This is the red herring of the story, and at the end it's going to be something mind-blowing. And they start playing with, okay, Jacob's in captivity or he's gone missing, right? And Frederick Aberline at one point makes this comment like, oh, the only person I know who's that good at killing is your brother. And you start thinking, oh, they're going to set it up like it's probably Jack the Lad and then surprise somehow it's Jacob or something like that. But no, it really was just, it's the guy that they say it is at the very beginning, and that's all there is to it. And the biggest fault for me with Jack is how unclear and strange his motivation seems to be. There seems to be this revenge angle to it, like he blames Jacob for the death of his mother, which they don't explain enough for us to care about. We're never really told enough information about the circumstances behind that incident to understand it well enough to empathize with him. And then at the very end, when he's having his boss battle fight with Evie, he starts talking about how he's going to save London and he's going to clean it up. And all of this is just about saving London. And how? How is murdering random prostitutes saving London? We need to know how the actions of the character translate into their motivation for any of it to make any sense. And we just don't get that in this story.
I had to check the Assassin's Creed wiki after I had completed it because I thought there was something I had missed with Jack's motivation. And it said that Starrick, or a Templar thug, is the one who killed Jack's mother. I was like, why does Jack hate Jacob for something he had no control over? After I figured that out, I was wondering, like, I think it would have been better if a rook had killed Jack's mother, because then Jacob would have, like, been partly responsible for it, or if they had just gone the Dark Knight route and just given him no origin story. So, because I don't get where he's coming from and why he hated Jacob for something he had literally not much control over. It was Starrick.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. I always have a problem with stories where the bad guy blames the good guy for just not preventing some terrible thing from happening. It's like a building collapses and your wife dies and you're just really mad at Superman because he didn't save her. It doesn't seem to make a whole lot of logical sense. And if the wiki was right and it was just some Starrick thug that killed Jack's mother, then that's exactly what's happening. For me, another thing that kind of frustrated me about Jack was just how, I guess, ridiculous and cartoony and I guess kind of outdated his portrayal of mental health problems is, because he literally is a cartoon psychopath. There's just, like, he just wants to kill people because, whoa, he's crazy. He likes to kill people. That's pretty, he was in Lambeth Asylum for a time, and I'm making the assumption from the sparse revelations we had through Evie's dialogue that I guess Jacob put him in the mental asylum at some point, or someone put him in a mental asylum because he was a crazy little boy who wanted to kill people. And that's just really weak. It's just very, easy. It's lazy. It's like, we need to have a guy who kills people, and we kind of want to give him a reason for why he's doing it, but all of their sort of half-assed attempts at giving him a motivation just fall apart even further when they're just making him a cartoon psychopath.
I would agree that it's an old way to portray a killer, but I don't know that I would necessarily call it outdated, because I actually looked into, I wouldn't necessarily call it portrayal of, I think there's multiple facets here where it's not just portrayal of mental health problems, and at the same time it's not a mental health problem that they assign to him that is a definable one that we can pinpoint. It's hard, it's really, honestly, it's pretty hard to portray this horrendous killer with anything but in any other way than with violent insanity. I do think that making some justification in the game may have been the wrong tack. It's really inconsistent, strangely. For instance, actually, you can target civilians as Jack, like they are highlighted, but if you kill them, then you get a message that says Jack did not compromise his plans by killing innocent civilians. So he's in this weird spot where he's a mad killer, but he has this weird set of standards. And I think that kind of fits into this weird... there's this weird category in the... it's not... It's just... this violent subcategory in the psychopathy Wikipedia article. And everything that links violence and mental health points out that the two are not necessarily intertwined. And it's really hard to tell or link necessarily deviant behavior to mental illness. But one of the things it talks about is that psychopaths, it's been suggested they use the word suggested, and suggested that psychopaths tend to be more pre-planned violence than random violence. So that would go along with that at least. But at the same time as he's in this area of mental health that's not really defined now. It was definitely not really defined then, in the 1800s. The time, I mean, if you remember, Lambeth Asylum would have been run, or at least set up, by Dr. Elliotson, who's a phrenologist and doesn't, I mean, he's a phrenologist, that's a quack science. He doesn't know anything about treating people. I'm sorry, this is just, it confuses me to talk about it, and I'm trying to make sense of it as I go through this, but it's quite difficult. My notes are all over the place.
Yeah, I think the thing with his characterization and how he decides to murder people is very, very vague, and kind of all over the place.
I do want to say one more thing, which is that going off of what seems to be like the very vague glimpses we get into some kind of plan that he has set up, is he's manipulating women in the city, especially. I mean, we know that he's kind of got his thumb on Lady Owers, and he's using fear to control them. And that's further why he murders Jacob's recruits that are posing as prostitutes, is because they threaten to disrupt his control. So I think that there's more than just mental illness. I mean, I guess I'm inferring a lot, but more than just mental illness, I would suspect that he's got a lot of the worst prejudices that we would associate with the era. Like, he definitely thinks of himself as above other people, and especially in this case, above women. And I think that's where I think that there are nuances to how he's portrayed, though I will agree that they're not, it's this weird, it's this bit between where they should have probably shown more explicitly, if they were going to show reasoning for the way he is, they should have shown it more explicitly. And this part where I'm trying to infer so much based off of what vague information we have.
There's a lot of vagueness going on. But one thing, Connor, to your point about how he premeditates a lot of stuff, one thing I liked about how we play as Jack is that there's the opening part, which I'll talk about later, but then there's the time when he does the cleanup at the ships in the island, and then when he goes to set up his plan in the asylum. And what I liked was the way he went about doing that, and that he is very, very calculating, and he thinks things through beforehand, and he has a plan. He's not sort of, like the Joker who just kind of chases after cars like a dog, he says, but he has something going on, and he's very methodical about how he does things. So after Evie does the second assassination mission, he goes in, and the little text on the side says, no witnesses. So you just kind of go in and kill all of your guys and all of the cops too if you play like that. But it fit with his character, I thought, what little of his character we have. Then the second time we do that, when we go in ahead of time and attack the people in the asylum, is what really made me feel off playing as Jack. Because playing as Jack, killing random thugs, fine. But when he has a name for his nurse, and he says, I'm going to kill whatever her name was, and there's actually sort of a person behind it, it felt really, really weird playing that part. And it got me, I guess, in the right mindset to play as Evie going in, because I felt just off. And we talked about this before when Connor and I were on Animus Island about the soundtrack and how the music really just feels wrong. That mission going through the asylum made me feel like, no, I shouldn't be doing this. This is weird. This is wrong. This is bad. And then switching to Evie and then going through afterwards put me in the perfect mindset to play as Evie, and like I can fix this now. I can go and stop it.
Yeah.
So that was one set of 2 missions that worked really well together with Jack and Evie.
I would like to say one thing to your point before we get too much farther away from it, and I think that you're right. I think it's very interesting that Jack, when you play as Jack, there are a lot of they go to great lengths to make it feel off and wrong, and I think this is just something that I just thought of off the top of my head, but I think that if they do succeed well in portraying Jack, it's that the way they portray him tends to be a perversion of the assassins. I mean, you start off immediately, and he's in control of the Rooks, not just any gang. He's in control of the Rooks. He's taken over control of the Rooks from the main game that you built up as Jacob and Evie. So right off the bat, there's that, and he's manipulating the prostitutes, and obviously he goes very much further in every method of assassination he does. I mean, he's the first. You immediately play as him, and you're murdering people in the most horrible ways compared to the assassins, who are a lot more
Clean.
Clean, yeah.
Laid to the neck.
And that's my point. I think that probably what they were going for, and what probably got overshadowed by other things, is that Jack is mostly a perversion of the assassin.
I think that's just one example of many things that they probably really wanted to do, but couldn't for several reasons. And I'm going to get into that in a later segment here. But yeah, I agree completely.
I think that mental health can be portrayed better, and Jack's backstory could have been portrayed better. I just can't quite put my finger on how it could have been implemented in a better way.
Well, I think you can create a reason why he is the way he is, and I think they were touching on that. I think if they had presented the story of this little kid who loses everything that is important to him and then blames the people who he feels responsible, and then tries to create his own, I guess, perversion of the creed as a response like that, it could have worked. It could have been pulled off. It could have been compelling. The problem, in my opinion, was not in the idea of it, but in the execution. Because honestly, I know I said earlier that I think it was an outdated and kind of unrealistic cartoony portrayal, but what Connor said about how you can't really portray Jack the Ripper any other way, I agree. I think that's true. I mean, in real life, Jack the Ripper was a horribly bloody, violent killer, one of the most repugnant killers in terms of what he did to his victims. Just the worst. So I guess maybe they were smart to not try and make him empathetic at all, to just have him be as cartoony and villainous as possible, because in the real world, he was pretty cartoony and villainous.
I guess a better way to examine mental health would be with a character that isn't Jack the Ripper then.
Yeah, definitely.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in terms of how we look at mental health, this definitely doesn't exactly help, because I think it reinforces some of the wrong stereotypes about mental health. That's another longer discussion, but I think and we've talked about this exactly, but it's so many things scream, no, that's not what mental health is actually like. No, stop, please. So things went wrong with his characterization.
Yeah, that's not our current understanding of mental health, and certainly right now we're doing a lot in the modern day to be a lot more understanding and sympathetic to those with mental health issues. There is still as I mentioned, there's a whole category of mental health, and I think a lot of mental health and psychology is like this, but there's an awful lot that we still don't know. And I do think at the moment there is space for Jack to fit into that, but at the same time, I think that it can be hard to realize that, I guess. It's not necessarily obvious that, hey, Jack's in this category of mental health that we don't really know anything about, and we're taking advantage of that to portray this crazy person. Whereas I think a lot of people might just associate all mental health together when in truth there's a lot of different things that are going on for a lot of different people, and we don't really know that much about it.
One thing I kind of picked up on in the beginning, playing Jack the Ripper, I don't know if you guys saw some parallels to current events, but
yes.
When they were talking about Jack the Ripper, who's an extremist assassin who radicalizes his followers and rule over London through fear, I was kind of like, I wonder if that was intentional. And then the papers sensationalizing the killings and inspiring copycat crimes kind of made me think, like, I wonder if they're trying to say something. Is this intentional? What did you guys think?
For sure. I think Ubisoft has a good track record of touching on issues that are important to a lot of people in our modern day. Watchdog security with Prism and digital surveillance. Assassin's Creed Unity with sort of revolutionary themes and income inequality being big at that point in time. And this with the slew of killings that happen daily and how the paper wanted to publish it because we should have Jack's letters out. People should know when Jacob says, no, you're not helping. I really liked the way they handled that at the beginning.
Yeah, and I think, well, I'll get to this later. It's literally like the last thing we talk about with Jack the Ripper. So I have a point, but I'll talk about it later.
Yeah, I was prepared to be like, what? Nah, it's not touching on any current events. I don't see that at all. But now that I think about it, you're pretty much right on the money with that, Katie. And it surprised me because Syndicate didn't touch on really modern current events much at all. It was very much just being what it was and being a fun little Assassin's Creed story. And Jeffrey Yohalem makes a lot of points about how, in some ways, the London we see in Syndicate is intended to be a more idealized version of it. That's why we see so many female gang members, which left a lot of people going, what's up with that? Because there weren't a whole lot of female gang members at the time in Victorian London. But Jack the Ripper, as a whole, is so different from Syndicate in so many ways that really shouldn't surprise me. Everything about it, from the tone to the style, is so much darker and more serious and grounded than Syndicate ever dreamed of being. So having it touch on common current events is, I guess, pretty fitting. So that about wraps it up for our thoughts on the character of Jack the Ripper. We are now going to move into our next segment on the fear mechanic.
So, if you played Jack the Ripper, you know that the fear mechanic is basically Jack the Ripper's continuation of the skill tree with a bit more overt skills, we'll say. You get this new ability to terrorize your enemies using bombs and these things called, well, they are spikes, but they change depending on which character you're using them with. And you also use brutal takedowns to terrify people. And it's really interesting because in all of this, you have a parallel and a contrast between Jack the Ripper and Evie Fry, whereas they both use the fear tactics and they both work essentially the same. Jack's are all lethal. Like, when you do a brutal takedown, you stab a guy multiple times. It's actually longer when you do a brutal takedown as Jack, and there's more to it. And so you have these really brutal, like, multiple stab wound death things, whereas with Evie you have a couple punches and the use of this powder to, I believe, make them hallucinate, going off of its effects on Evie later in the story. But what I want to focus on immediately is actually the non-lethal aspect of it with Evie specifically, because it's revealed pretty early on that this fear technique, as it's referred to, is something that the Indian assassins developed. And having just read Underworld. This is pretty early on in the book, so I don't think it's that spoilery. But the Indian branch of assassins is very kind of... They're almost medieval. They're a lot less progressive than the London assassins. In fact, one of the big issues in the book is that Henry is a character that really doesn't want to kill people. And he is actually shunned from the Indian branch of assassins because he couldn't kill someone he was supposed to. So it seems weird to me that they developed this non-lethal method. And I think possibly where the non-lethal method comes from is when Evie and Henry return to India. Henry especially being a person that doesn't want to kill people, and Evie being a very strong person who can get people to do what she wants. It seems likely to me that on their return, they had a hand in creating this much more this non-lethal method that would be much more in line with Henry's own style of assassinship.
Yeah, I agree. Although I didn't read Underworld, I think some of the Batman parallels of using fear instead of lethality are good. But between Evie and Jack the Ripper and how they use their fear items, the takedowns, the bombs, and the spikes, there's a key difference being that Jack the Ripper straight up murders people, but Evie does not. When Evie uses her fear techniques, it's all with the powder and the little screaming noise it makes. It's not a little screaming noise, it's a big screaming noise. But Evie's things are all creating something that looks like more than it is to make up for the fact that she's not actually killing people. So it's all about getting into the other person's mind and trying to make them freak out more than what's actually going on. This is very different from Jack, who will take a spike, stab you through their hand and then into your chest, and then let everyone see that you just totally skewered this man, and then they're all going to run away because they're terrified of what will physically happen to them. So it's two very different types of fear, which I thought was really cool. It's not just, they're both doing the same thing. They have their own takes on how you use fear as a weapon. Jack's fear is very physical, and, I'm afraid of what will happen to me because I saw that guy get mangled. With Evie, it is a very different beast entirely. And I liked the way that it was handled with that.
At first, when I was playing it, or perhaps I think I saw a stream of Jack the Ripper first, I was a bit taken aback because they're like, oh, Evie's been learning some things in India and she's become kind of non-lethal. And I'm like, what? A non-lethal assassin? That's like an oxymoron if I've ever heard one. But I was thinking about it. I'm like, maybe India was Evie's Nanda Parbat, and she's basically Batman now. Maybe non-lethality is an evolution of stealth. She doesn't want to get into as much fights. Maybe that's an evolution of it. It'd be interesting. I don't know if Underworld would get into that more, but maybe it's like she's been married to Henry Green all this time. He's not into killing, and maybe they've kind of influenced each other. So it was an interesting development.
Yeah, I think there's nothing more brilliant in a video game than when you have gameplay mechanics that actually tie in and synchronize with the storytelling and the themes of a game. And it's really simple to notice just how well Jack the Ripper does that. The fear mechanic is front and center, and fear as a device in the story is also front and center. It's one of the game's overarching themes. Can Evie use fear as a weapon without succumbing to it herself? Can she use terror to her advantage without becoming a monster in her own right? And that's something that she kind of struggles with throughout the story, because you have Jack doing these terrible, terrible things, and she's hunting him down, she's chasing him, and she's being exposed to all of the horror and violence and destruction. And also, in some cases, using that to her advantage. And the question that she has to face and the struggle that she has throughout the story is how can she win against an agent of terror by using terror herself. And the fear mechanics did a really good job of taking that story idea and putting it right there in the gameplay where the player is going to use it and choose to use it autonomously. When you are throwing a fear bomb, you are making that connection to the player character. And I think that that's really effective. And the other example of that, as you guys just discussed, is the whole lethality versus non-lethality. It took me a little while to notice that whenever you kill somebody in the combat of the game, you don't kill them, you just knock them out. They're still lying on the ground kind of, struggling. They're like unconscious almost. They're still alive. And that was a really interesting change of pace. Because if you are, that guy who's playing the game, you can still go around and just hidden blade to the chest everybody once they're already on the ground. But giving you the option to remain non-lethal in the way that Evie would was a pretty brilliant way of using the gameplay to foster that connection to the character and to the story. I think the DLC did that really well across the board. It's one of its biggest strengths.
Yeah, I think just given that non-lethality with Evie as the default option goes a long way to establishing her character and a bit how she's changed in the intervening years between the main game and the DLC. Interestingly, I think this feeds back into that point I made earlier, how Jack is a perversion of the Assassins proper. And it basically, whereas the Assassin's Creed, like the Creed, frames immoral actions, killing people in a moral context, eliminate one person for the good of many. Jack's Creed kind of removes the moral aspect and is more focused on the ends, and the means are really just the most effective, I guess, in this case. And for Jack, the most effective means, since he's based his stuff on terror, is the most radical and extreme means to an end. So in the effect, we get this thing where Jack really is shown to be this monster, and he uses his monstrosity to effect a control over Whitechapel that rivals, honestly, you can feel Jack's influence in Whitechapel a lot better than you can feel Templar's influence in any other games, I think.
Yeah, and I totally agree with the points that you just made, Connor. I think with the idea of monstrosity, Evie makes a huge deal about that in the very end of the DLC with the boss fight when she's shouting, "You won't make a monster out of me," while literally at that same moment doing a brutal takedown on Jack, which is sort of monstrous. And Lawson, again, to your greater point that you're making that led us into this, Evie is having a really hard time in this fight because she is having to take down Jack without becoming him, basically. The Batman themes are overwhelming in this, but I was thinking about how fear is used in this specific fight. They're both, in a way, terrified and terrifying, because think about it. You are either A, Evie, who is hiding in the darkness as this, terrifying, deathly figures walking around trying to look for you. But on the other hand, if you're playing as Jack, you're walking around while someone is waiting in the darkness to kill you. Both of those are not fun. So I like how they really played with terror and being terrified are both things that can kind of bounce off of each other and sort of play cyclically into being the same thing the whole way through. So that I loved, because I think thematically this DLC is an absolute gem among the entire franchise. While the characters maybe not so much, I think they really hammered on it with the fear mechanic in this game. So I loved it.
I didn't really feel like there was a huge internal conflict with Evie not trying to become a monster. I think to me, it just felt like she didn't want to be perceived as a monster for being an assassin, and she wanted to preserve the integrity of the assassins in London and make sure that Jack didn't take them over. That's what I thought the conflict was. Perhaps I was missing this whole big thing But
I think you're right, and I think though a lot of Gregory's statements can be applied not just to Evie but to the assassins as a whole in this case, especially as the assassins are the much more explicit, the more explicitly perverted entity here. But I do think in the boss fight against Jack, that is probably when Evie is most stressed, and when, I mean, it's her life on the line at that moment. And Jack is this formidable opponent. It took me a couple tries to figure out how to defeat him. So I think in this moment, Evie, I mean, as far as she knows, there's not really an assassin order still out there in London. I think she transplants a lot of this responsibility, even if some of it's, I mean, even if Jack did all the stuff, I think she transplants a lot of it onto herself, and the assassins possibly.
So, Katie, to your point about Evie, the reason I personally felt that there was an internal conflict going on was because of my specific playstyle with this game, which was that even though in the actual events of Syndicate proper, I played Evie and also mostly Jacob pretty stealthily, with the fear mechanic, I just said stealth be fucked, and basically went in guns blazing, except instead of guns blazing, it's more fear bombs blazing. So I wanted to be seen by as many people as possible. I would jump in with a brutal takedown, toss a fear bomb down on my feet, stab someone with a spike, and just go through and try to get everyone to run away from me. And I played it very much like that because, A, it was fun, but also, B, I wanted to use these new tools and see how they kind of worked into the whole, way that Evie was working her way through this this story. So for me, I felt a lot of the conflict because of how I personally was playing, but I can see if you were playing more stealthily, you wouldn't have felt that at all in comparison. But I felt very out of character playing Evie in this very non-stealthy, kind of loud going in, I want everyone to see what I'm doing and I want everyone to be scared and run away manner, which is very different and sort of like playing with Jack. It feels off in a way, which again is good in this context. But it worked for me with how I was playing it. It all thematically fit in very well to the overarching ideas I was getting from it.
And I also think that the dialogue, the lines she says about, don't make a monster out of me. I think there are several instances of her basically going, how am I going to do this without becoming just as bad as he is, right? So I don't think... I think there is an internal conflict there, but I will probably concede that, like many other parts of this story in this DLC, it's very held back by whatever limits or requirements were placed on the development. There are a lot of moments just like that one where you can see an attempt at a theme or a characterization or a reveal. You can see it shining through, and it just hasn't. They weren't able to actually execute it in the story in a way that really told you exactly what was happening. But yeah, I agree. I think the existence of the fear weapons is enough to drive home that internal conflict for me. So yeah.
Going off your point about the play styles, Greg, I did try to play stealthily, but I do think the fear mechanic is geared towards being less stealthy. In fact, I found it kind of difficult to play proper stealth as I would have thought of it. I mean, even just going off of, obviously, to pull off a brutal takedown most effectively, you have to get in the middle of a large group of people and then pull off a brutal takedown. And that's often easiest when you're actually in the middle of a fight. At the same time, I found, the spikes are pretty loud. They attract attention, and the same with the bombs. And I found that they were best for stealth when they were fully upgraded, but even then, it's still hard to play as stealthily as you would in the main game, unless you play exactly like you would in the main game. That being said, I really liked the fear mechanic as a gameplay mechanic. I thought it was a lot of fun. it could be a little inconsistent as to what would frighten enemies and what would just scare them a little bit. Personally, I do wish that more of the upgrades just you'd use them and would bring an enemy to full terror. I think the only one... Let's see. I think brutal takedowns always engender full terror, but they can sometimes be a shorter range, and then only the very center of the blast, if you throw a bomb at people, creates full terror. And if they see someone spiked, it's just a little bit of fear. As well, there's an upgrade that makes people nervous if they see a terrified enemy, which possibly should have come about earlier. I felt like that would have been where you could really use the fear mechanic to its fullest, like set up a lot of enemies by frightening some few enemies who then go and spread this sense of unease throughout the crowd, and then when you get to that part of the crowd, then you can just throw them into full terror. But that being said, I think that the idea is great. The execution is almost there. They're just like a couple tweaks that would have made me a little happier.
Brass knuckles seem to be the least EV-like weapon to me. When I would play Syndicate, I would usually have EV equipped with a cane sword and Jacob with a kukri or brass knuckles. But I think it would have been interesting to see if they could have pulled off the fear mechanic with a stealthy style. Kind of like less overt, more covert. But I guess we'll never know.
Yeah, I can't see any way that would have worked. It doesn't seem like that would have been a very easy thing to do. I think it's definitely part of the fear mechanic. If you want to scare people, you generally want to be pretty loud, obnoxious, and obvious, and big and out there. I don't really see the fear mechanic working super well with a stealthy playthrough, and that's why I didn't really use it very often.
I think there's a counterexample that is the Arkham series, which, enemies get... They don't...
I haven't played those.
You can never quite cause enemies to run away out of fear, but as you take out more and more goons, and especially doing certain things, like certain types of takedowns will especially make goons nervous, and they can start firing blindly out of fear, but... So a bit more of a ramp up like that might have worked with stealth fear, where it's like you could stealthily make. I don't know. That one's more like a focused on taking them off until one person is absolutely terrified, and I don't know quite how that would translate into Assassin's Creed, but yeah.
The Syndicate AI for the enemies in Syndicate is just so stupid that would never have worked unless they just rebuilt the AI from the ground up, which, I mean, they could totally do that for a future installment, and I would love it.
Well, they say they do that every year, but...
Because the AI needs to be smarter to just, hold up as a stealth game. Right. And I mean, when you have games coming out like Metal Gear Solid 5 that are just, showing you how to do it, you got to just evolve it a little bit. But that's a whole can of worms. I don't want to go off on a big tangent.
Yeah. As far as that goes, I think that's probably due to Assassin's Creed focusing on many different things, whereas like that AI is focused on one of their pillars, which is stealth, whereas they also want to focus on their other two pillars. But yeah. I think it would be interesting to have, because this is a slight tangent, but people say, Assassin's Creed is a stealth game. No, I always played Assassin's Creed to be the badass who murdered everybody, and I'm here and I'm like, I played Assassin's Creed to climb things. But I think going off their three pillars, I think possibly the way to make it work the best. I don't know. This is what I think would make for a decent series and kind of satisfy all of them, is that basically like rotate your strengths each game almost. Like one game you'd have a game focused primarily on stealth. You could have it harder Unity style combat with a greater emphasis on stealth. Then the next year you'd have a really hard combat focused game where you go really in deep depth into improving combat. Whereas in the stealth game, presumably you'd improve the AI a bunch for the stealth, and then the last game you'd put a lot of focus into the gameplay on parkour and using parkour to feed into, especially stealth, I guess, but making a much bigger deal of parkour and then just repeating the cycle. I think that would be, I don't know, that is probably ridiculous from an actual development standpoint, but I think it would make some sort of sense. Like I don't play Call of Duty, but it seems to me like that's kind of what Call of Duty does, is rotates it between several studios, each with their different strengths. And I think that might be a way to approach Assassin's Creed and satisfy everybody who thinks that Assassin's Creed is a different game.
Jack the Ripper was developed by Ubisoft Montpellier. They also developed the Dead Kings DLC. I was just wondering, the fear mechanic kind of seems like an evolution of the fighting the raiders mechanics. Do you think it's an evolution of that, or do you think the fear mechanic was originally intended for Dead Kings? Was it going to be darker, do you think, originally? What do you guys think?
I think that to its extent that it is in Jack the Ripper, I don't think it was ever planned to be in Dead Kings. I think, but I do think that Dead Kings tried out the idea initially. I mean, and that's much more focused on take out one guy and then send the rest of the room scrambling. And you kind of get that a little bit in Syndicate. You have leader AI, but they have kind of a radius around them that when you kill them, people in the radius will run away, but that's only usually useful for one or two guards. And I think a Syndicate-based game, it took me a little bit to figure out that that's what it was. Because whereas, in Unity, because in Unity they were kind of putting it forth as a mechanic, like, hey, look at this cool thing. Syndicate, it's kind of under the radar and not talked about. I mean, I think you can possibly find it in one of the tutorials that they work like that, but it's pretty quiet. So I think that Dead Kings probably started, like, it was the first iteration maybe of this idea that they wanted to implement in future games, and they sort of did it lightly in Syndicate, but I do think that they really focused on it more in Dead Kings and expanded it in a way that's not so limited, whereas obviously Dead Kings you have to kill a specific person, and in Jack the Ripper it's a lot more free form, I guess. I mean, there's still specific people who are advantageous to kill first, them being the brutes who are immune to fear, which were really annoying, but so I guess my point is I don't think it was planned, but I do think it's a clear evolution, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I would not make the assumption that they were trying to do the fear mechanic in Dead Kings and then just pushed it off to the next DLC. I think it is exactly what it looks like. They just took a mechanic that they had established in a previous iteration and just tweaked, evolved it, and in my opinion, made it really suit the story of Jack the Ripper. But anyway, we're going to move on to our next segment, which is just a very broad story analysis of the Jack the Ripper DLC and its entire plot. So the first thing that I want to say about Jack the Ripper's story, and this is something that I've already kind of touched upon in the previous segments here, is that you can tell that they wanted to do more, but could not. And you can learn a lot about this from Jeffrey O'Halem's interview about Dead Kings, because he talks about, I had all this stuff that I wanted to do with the story. You know, there's that moment where you see Elise, she runs through and Arno has to chase her. And, you know, obviously she's not real because, spoiler alert, Elise is dead, homie. So he wanted to have that keep happening. Like throughout the story, Arno would have to come to terms with the loss, and you'd kind of have to see that in him as he's like chasing Elise's ghost almost throughout the city. That could have been so cool. But they basically said, hey, we really like this story idea you've got here, but can you make it fit on 12 pages of script? I think that might have even been the exact limitation. I don't remember. I haven't listened to it in a while, but they do not get a lot of budget on these DLCs, and every single, you know, cutscene, every single thing costs money. I really get the impression in the story of Jack the Ripper that they had this whole great idea for Jack the Ripper and all of his motivations and his story, and that maybe they even wanted to have this flashback cutscene where you see his mom die. Maybe you understand more through that cutscene why Jack became so angry at Jacob. Maybe Jacob had the opportunity to stop it from happening, but chose not to save someone else or something of the sort. You know, they probably wanted to do that, and they probably tried to, and then realized they couldn't. They couldn't afford to. It wasn't in the budget. They didn't have the time to do it, or whatever the reason was. And then they started going, well, how can we keep it without any of that execution? And that leads into probably one of my biggest criticisms with the storytelling of Jack the Ripper. It is evident throughout the entirety of the story that Evie knows what is going on. She's the one who points out Jack the lad. She teases out all of these little lines of dialogue that just go a little bit further in explaining what's really going on. She's in on it. She knows who Jack is. She knows why he's doing the things that he's doing. And the reason she knows is because she's the only person who can tell the player. And that's probably what they had to do if they couldn't do cutscenes. And that really damages the entire experience of the DLC for me, because it makes me feel so disconnected from Evie. I can't immerse myself in the story at all. She knows the mystery. She knows the reveal at the end, or whatever, you know, not really reveal at the end, we'll say. She knows all of it. We don't. She's revealing it to us in dialogue. In a really good traditional story, the main character should serve as a window for the viewer, for the player, into the revelations of a story. The audience should learn the truth along with the character. If there's a moment that makes the audience go, but what? The character should also be right there going, but what? And so on and so forth. And because they couldn't do what they wanted to do, and this obviously this is just an assumption on my part. This might not be the whole truth. Maybe this is the extent of all the ideas they had. But because that's the case, we don't get that connection to Evie. Evie's just sitting there going, oh, Jacob helped you so much, and now you've turned against him. And we're sitting there going, I don't know what the hell you're on about, lady. Haven't gotten there yet. Haven't learned it. That's not good. That's not quality storytelling. And that makes me unhappy with the story as a whole.
It's certainly, I mean, there are stories that are structured specifically with the idea of keeping some crucial piece of information that everybody knows in the story from the viewer, but this is really not one of those stories. Because usually, I mean, anyway, in any case, those are usually science fiction, like, and at the end, it's like, in any case, everybody here is a pig, and the reason everybody's looking at you weird is because you're the only human in a pig's world. But that's not what this is. And it comes again. It feeds into this point where they have this weird thing to deal with, where in the marketing they made a big deal of all the revelations, but in actual point of fact, to do with budget and with the fact that you don't want to quite treat this horrendous character as too much of a work of fiction. It's weirdly balanced to it's weird because Evie obviously knows what's going on, and it's like it's almost like we're supposed to think that that's enough as far as Jack's reveal goes. Like, the big reveal is that Jack wasn't an assassin, but maybe if, like, I didn't know that before the story started, that would have had a bigger impact, but I did know that before the story started, and it had very little impact. I think it's cool, but it wasn't a shocker moment when I found out that he was an assassin. It didn't blow my mind. Whereas again, I mean, truly revealing who he was would have been in poor taste, but they kind of missed the mark in what they do reveal and how they reveal it, again, with Lawson's point to Evie already being in on everything. And I'll talk about this a bit later, but I think the story as a whole seems more focused, maybe not the story as a whole, but the DLC as a whole, once you get past just the story, seems more focused on how Jack's terror affects London and its inhabitants rather than how Jack the Ripper came to be what he is. It's more about what's happening now, but it's not quite structured to make that effective.
Yeah, and I think exactly to both of your points that you made earlier, I think there's really not a lot going on with the reveal of Jack because there really is none. Before the DLC came out, we were all thinking, oh, how's the Shroud going to factor into this? How's this going to factor into this? Who really is Jack? And all of that just kind of flew out the window the second that Evie says, oh, yeah, look at that. It's Jack the Lad. Oh, well, okay, that's cool. There was such a letdown in the identity of Jack, and I'd just be repeating both of your points. But I felt like it was for the reasons we said, a missed opportunity that you really can't unmiss. But it was sort of destined to go horribly wrong.
Can I just say that makes Jack's naming himself seem like the most lazy thing ever. He's like, well, I already have a Jack and a the in my name.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just going to add in a Ripper rather than a Lad. Because that is where I think the name Jack the Ripper, yeah, and he did name himself.
I like to rip things. I'm just gonna be Jack the Ripper.
Okay, Jack, that's great, Jack. Cool, just go ahead. Yeah, fine, cool, Jack. Imagining someone just patronizing him.
He didn't name himself in one of his letters, so that is what would have happened. He would have had to thought up his own name. It's not like it was assigned to him in this case. So
Jack the Stabber? No. Jack the Slasher? No. Damn it!
Did anybody else kind of? Did anyone kind of giggle at when the screen UI effect would say, rip them? Like, that's what he does. I don't know. I thought that was really funny to me for some reason.
It could have been rest in peace, them.
that's probably yeah. But that probably would have been how he came up with it. He would have had the mission control thing pop in and been like, name yourself Jack the Ripper. Okay.
Seems legit.
That's another weird thing. I guess this goes back to the mental health thing slightly. But that the mission control being distorted makes it seem like Jack has voices in his head almost. Which is another kind of, that one I do think might be a bit of just throwing mental health issues, like mental health symptoms at a wall, and seeing which ones stick.
You should kill him, Jack.
The other thing is that, did any of you guys notice that when you attack people as Jack, their screams of agony sound very much inhuman, sort of like how his own voice sounds a little bit weird?
They're all distorted. They have been pitched down.
He hears other people differently, yeah, which was really cool. I like that.
That is one thing. I do think that they really nail the atmosphere, both playing as Evie and playing as Jack, and the difference.
Agreed.
Just in visual style and in audio style for both.
But yeah, so Greg, what are your thoughts on the opening scene?
I liked the opening scene. I thought it was a good way to establish Jack. We talked a little bit about this earlier, but I personally thought, oh, well, he went and murdered Jacob. That's fun. And then I was thinking, I'm gonna get this son of a bitch. So it put me in the mode to be like, yeah, let's go and get this guy. Let's get this motherfucker. And then of course we sort of find out later on that Jacob might not be dead, but he's actually alive, which is good. But I thought, oh well, there goes my motive for revenge. But I like how he started off as Jacob because we got to see like what he's been doing, sort of. I like that he took the stand and said, please don't publish these letters. You're not helping, guys. But I also like that they sort of hinted at, in the very beginning, that he's been sort of on top of this and following this Jack case. And then we know why, that he knows what's really going on. But I think the opening played pretty well. That you were sort of Jacob and then sort of Jack for a while. It felt a little bit forced and rushed. But overall, I liked how they sort of led with you playing as Jack, and you actually have the first fight is really fighting Jacob. Kind of, it made me feel, again, very off, thinking I'm pressing square to punch Jacob in the face, but I know I shouldn't be doing that because he's Jacob, I like Jacob. Still punching square, still punching Jacob in the face. So it set the tone pretty well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was kind of weird.
I think I really liked the opening as well. I think I keep seeing people thinking like, man, they really depowered Jacob for this and blah, blah, blah. And I guess that can be valid for you, but it's not valid for me. Anything that happens in a cutscene, I guess I'm just so used to video games at this point. Anything that happens in a cutscene is not representative of you in gameplay at all. Whether it's old Prince of Persia games, the prince being able to pull off major parkour in cutscenes that he wouldn't be able to if you were playing as him, or in the opposite direction, the prince being felled by an enemy that you could have killed in 2 seconds in normal combat. Cutscenes are about delivering story more than adhering to how good you are at the game. So in that part, I think that's fine. And I think that was actually a really intense scene. I thought it was really interesting to see, because in the main game, I don't feel like Jacob's ever in distress, really. I mean, a little bit in the end fight, but he gets knocked over and then walks back up, gets strangled a bit, but Evie's right there to help him. And in Jack the Ripper, Jacob is on his own. I mean, you're introduced, you don't really know how much is going on. And I feel like that sense of Jacob being, I mean, he's on top of the case, but it feels like he's losing, I guess, especially once, I mean, I don't think there's a reveal, but once I was out in the world and I was fighting this gang in purple, I was like, I wonder why they're wearing purple, and I looked up who the enemies were, and it was like, whoa, these are the Rooks. So I think that the opening does a really good job of setting up of just giving you this really intense introduction to this much darker DLC.
Yeah, I don't really have much of a response to that other than that I agree completely. The sort of killing Jacob thing was a bit, I guess, strange to experience. But yeah, Katie, go ahead.
Okay, so for me, the World War I simulation ruined the surprise somewhat of, like, at the end it's revealed Jacob is alive. Because I'm like, yeah, the database said so. So I guess it kind of took me out of it. Like, I guess I was kind of like, could the database be wrong? But I really don't think it would be. So I was kind of like, oh, it was cut away. So you don't know if he's dead. So I'm like, he's probably alive because it's not confirmed. And then he ended up being alive.
Yeah, I at the time when I first read that in the World War I database, I was very happy that it was confirmation that Jacob did not equal Jack, because he was still around in the early 1900s. But on the other hand, it did kind of take that. I didn't have the revenge motivation quite as much. It was more about finding Jacob because I knew Jacob was alive. And I guess that's one thing, is I feel like that's our curse for reading the database really closely, being so consumed in the lore.
I mean, I didn't even read the database, and just the knowledge that eventually he'd have a daughter named Lydia made me go, yeah, this probably isn't...
Or granddaughter.
Yeah, you're right. Sorry. Mind fart. That he's going to end up having children who will eventually have Lydia Fry, you know. Just that was enough to make me kind of assume that he wasn't going to die, that he would survive. Because I feel like if they really were going to kill him in the DLC, there would have been some acknowledgement or mention of his already existing children, and that you would have seen them, like, exist, just so that when Jacob would theoretically die, you could just make the logical assumption in your head that their kids just moved on, were taken in by Evie maybe, or different caretakers somehow, and that would all be well and dandy. So as soon as he disappeared and we hadn't already heard mention of or acknowledgement of any existing children, I was like, yeah, they're not going to kill him off.
So, further on in the DLC, we've got, for me, it's this one memory that I thought was really cool as far as tying the story into history. You've got this, it's kind of like the murder mysteries, except you're investigating the happenings at the murder scenes of Jack's actual victims. And I thought that was a really interesting way to tie it back into history and expand on it in the assassin conspiracy way. I mean, the assassins being disguised as prostitutes might have been a bit contrived, but I thought the actual gameplay there was really interesting. I thought that way to tie it into history was also really interesting. And I think that kind of goes for the side content as a whole. The DLC seems to use a lot more of its side content, an ambient story, to show more of the history than the main games do. Like, Jack is inspiring copycat crimes. You've got missions surrounding his letters to newspapers, and you've also got a whole bunch of missions centered around the people who have the most to fear, which are London's prostitutes, and that doesn't even just touch on just Jack. That touches on how prostitutes are treated generally, and that's something that people kept saying about the main game is for a game series that used to have prostitutes front and center. Suddenly this one doesn't, when it would have been a really big issue in the time the game is set. And I think that this kind of, in my mind, makes up for that, because it kind of does address prostitution in this context. And this entire DLC does really well, I think, for giving you it's probably the thing, I mean, it's probably the piece of Assassin's Creed content that I would think probably actually teaches you more without making you go looking for it. Like, it provides it for you.
With regards to the side content, one piece of side content that I didn't think necessarily had the best gameplay, but was very good for the story, was the I think the carriages of justice, or whatever they were called. Those were the ones where someone is being wrongfully accused of being Jack, or at least they're a suspect, and you have to secretly take them back to Scotland Yard before they get murdered by the mob. And I thought that was a really interesting side content piece, because it touches on the sort of mob mentality and people shouting, like, I'm going to take justice into my own hands and do this in a way that is, acting outside the law, which is interesting because Evie is sort of doing the same thing, because I was about to call him Lestrade. What's his name? Not Freddie Mercury. Frederick Aberline. He was saying, like, Evie, you got to get your shit together. I'm covering for you now, but I can't keep doing this. It's interesting seeing the different ways in which people act outside of the law to try to enact justice. The people who are going to lynch this poor bastard are doing it the wrong way. Evie is doing it, I would argue, the right way. So it was cool to see the contrast between how different people outside of the law go about trying to get justice.
Yeah, Freddy is an awesome, entertaining character, and I think the side missions were a very interesting addition to the game and the gameplay. There was a wide variety of them, several different, entirely new kinds of side missions. Some were hit and miss. I think there were some that I really enjoyed and some that I really did not. I did not enjoy the Carriage of Justice missions just from a gameplay perspective, but probably would have enjoyed them a whole lot more if they were shorter. Just make me travel a shorter distance, please. It goes on too long and I get bored.
Yeah, the gameplay was terrible, but the idea was great.
Right. And another example of that actually ties back into what Connor was saying just now is the Walk of Shame side mission, which I thought was kind of interestingly progressive in a way that's very in line with how Syndicate decided to treat those gender issues, because Syndicate was kind of taking the whole gender problems weren't a thing perspective. And of course that was intentional. I'm not counting that as a fault of Syndicate in any way. That there were perfectly good reasons behind that. But the Walk of Shame side mission is kind of like, for anyone who doesn't remember exactly what it was or didn't do it, it's a mission where you basically stumble upon a prostitute who is being somehow abused by a client. And then you take the client and walk him through the streets of the town, just showing him to crowds like, look at this guy, what an idiot. He was beating up a prostitute. Wow. And you're just trying to make him ashamed, and then eventually he'll get chewed out by, I already forgot her name, but I'm talking about Jacob's friend.
Nellie,
that's right. And it was kind of strange to me because, prostitutes, I don't know enough about historical, situation of prostitutes to really comment on that. Maybe they were more accepted back then than they are now or something. I don't really know. But I just felt like that was such a strange situation that it wouldn't really happen, that you wouldn't have people deriding as a crowd, the guy who's abusing prostitutes. Like, I just don't think anyone cared back then. It seemed like one of those things that they were doing to sort of, I guess, have a bit more of a female empowerment, feminist angle to it. And I have no problems with that. It's just that, as I said earlier, this DLC as a whole was very much stepping away from that mindset, very much going darker and more realistic with its portrayal of Victorian London at the time. If this had been Syndicate, if Walk of Shame had been a Syndicate thing, it would have felt totally at home right there. It would have made perfect sense. I don't think it makes sense in Jack the Ripper. But I don't want to open up a whole can of worms on that. The main thing that I really want to talk about is just that historically, in every single game almost, there's been some connection between the assassins and the prostitutes. Going all the way back to Assassin's Creed 2, the prostitutes are a big part of Assassin Operation. They're kind of an appendant body, a sister organization, if you will. And they work together. They help each other. So having assassins on the inside as prostitutes really makes a whole lot of sense if you think about it, because the assassins are going to want to make sure that they're being represented within the prostitute hierarchy of power or whatever, and making sure that their interests are known, I guess. So I had no problems with that idea at all. And I just think having the prostitute sort of become the ally faction of Jack the Ripper, where the Rooks had been corrupted by Jack, was a clever way to keep things balanced. And I pretty much enjoyed all of it. So, yeah.
Well, I think Jack the Ripper's take on history took a few leaps and bounds, maybe a bit too far, like making Jack a mob boss who rules over London with fear when he was really just a guy who murdered a few people. I think what Jack the Ripper got right was the tone. You really kind of felt scared of what was happening and of Jack. When I was playing the final boss fight, I was like really, really scared, like probably the most scared I've ever been playing an AC game. So while I think like sometimes the history was off, I think it was better implemented than Syndicate's everything is awesome kind of view of history. Because it kind of bugged me that like gender issues weren't ever even like brought up in Syndicate. It's not like I wanted it to be like a game, like gender issues in the game. It just seems like that would have been an appropriate time when you have a female protagonist and you're in the Victorian era where they were really strict about that. But I liked Jack the Ripper's take on including the prostitutes and examining some of those issues. And I think I've always kind of found it weird when assassins used prostitutes as a game mechanic. It always kind of felt a little bit weird, but when it was part of the narrative, I appreciated that more. And that's all I have to say about that.
All right, let's go to our first ever installment of The Kitchen Sink, and we will talk about Star Wars The Force Awakens, which was awesome and fantastic in every single way. Well, not every single way, but most of them. I saw it opening night, Thursday night, midnight in the middle of finals week with some of my buddies. It was awesome, and I loved it.
We were done with finals.
I was done with finals, but it was in the middle of finals week.
Intentionally misleading language, regardless.
You win this round, Connor. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, Connor and Greg go to school together. In case that confused you, listeners.
Yes, that it's. We'll have segments about our shenanigans in our ancient Greek class at some point. But anyway, first up, let's talk about one of my favorite characters, Kylo Ren, who I thought was fantastic. I'm going to be saying that word a lot because I think this movie was fantastic. So his deal was, he's this guy with this crazy awesome lightsaber, which is basically a visual metaphor for his character. It's, red, obviously, but it sort of looks like it's on fire. It's not exactly stable. It's kind of all over the place. It's got these side vents to kind of vent out the extra stress the blade is taking on. So it's not a very okay blade. It's all over the place and it's very wacky, much like Kylo. So this guy is very scary, visually intimidating. He can stop a blaster bolt with his fucking hand, which is crazy awesome. And when he takes off his helmet and his cool mask and all that stuff, he looks like a total dweeb. No offense to Adam Driver, you did a great job, but you don't look like a Sith Lord. And that's the point, which is really cool, because he hides behind this mask. He tries to put on this, Darth Vader-like veneer to mask the fact that he's just a confused child at this point who is wrangling with all these difficult things. When he's talking to the Darth Vader mask, he says, help me, I see the light, I'm conflicted again, I'm having all these problems. And I like how, in this early stage, they're playing him as this sort of better version of what Anakin should have been in the prequels, where he's stuck in this kind of position and he doesn't know what to do or how to get himself out of it. And I really liked the arc that they give him in this movie, where it starts off very intimidating and then he takes kind of a dive in the middle where you see all the stuff he's going through and how not a Sith Lord he is. And then after the bridge scene, which Kate is going to talk about, he basically goes full on Sith and he's like, okay, I've made my choice. Here I am. And then he gets his face sort of chopped in half. Not really. And Snoke says, hey, we're going to go have a training montage in the next movie. Isn't that going to be fun? So that'll be cool. But what I'm thinking is that instead of giving him a redemption arc like with Darth Vader, it would make so much sense and work so well if they have an arc in which he descends further and further and further into being a proper Sith Lord by the end. That would be very satisfying. I think that they sort of had his one shot at a redemption arc, but when he killed Han, done, gone. So I like where this character is now. I'm really excited to see where he's going. And I think they did him so well, especially in comparison to Anakin. They make having a conflicted, not quite whiny, but sort of whiny villain good. And it's so annoying that they didn't do it earlier. Like, his tantrum scenes are fantastic. He doesn't kill people, he just breaks stuff because he needs to get all of his anger out somehow. It works so well. I love it.
I really liked how my expectations of Kylo Ren were subverted. Like, he initially, especially with the marketing and the initial scenes, he certainly feels like next-gen Darth Vader. Like, he's essentially the same guy, just newer and shinier. But he subverts that so well, like Greg said, with how we discover him to be so kind of immature and lost compared to Vader, who's so certain. It's an interesting comparison because Kylo Ren, obviously, he holds Vader in such high esteem and wants to emulate him. And I think a lot of his insecurity comes from the fact that he knows that there are so many obstacles in his own head that he has to overcome to be anywhere close to who Darth Vader was. And again, the almost redemption arc I thought was really interesting because I felt like it almost, either way, I think the way they, and I'll talk more about this later, but the way they set up the movie is it feels very familiar, but the way certain things happen and the way certain things resolve set it off on a new path that is wholly unfamiliar. And even if he had been redeemed initially, that would have created a much different setup for following movies. Just because we haven't quite had a character like that yet, and it might have drawn some interesting parallels to Finn, who hops over from the dark side to the light side very early on in the movie. But given what we have, I'm still very interested in Kylo Ren's character arc and what we're going to see from him in the future.
Yeah, see, my opinion is, in terms of the Anakin parallels, which you've all mentioned, in terms of the Anakin parallels, I think it's kind of in a sense of Kylo. Kylo is kind of what Anakin should have been, because Anakin definitely nailed the whiny teenager vibe, but that always felt more unintentional than anything else. And Anakin was also a shithead the whole time. Like, he's never been a clear-cut good guy, you know? Like, you're supposed to see him as this totally, like, this... He's sold as a Jedi hero who loses his way and succumbs to the dark side. But that doesn't really happen to him. He's like a Jedi or whatever, but he's kind of a dick the whole time. And when he falls to the dark side, it just feels like the natural evolution of his character. Kylo is completely different entirely, because Kylo is this emo goth kid, basically, who is having teenage angst and decides to rebel against his parents. Only this is a Star Wars universe, and his parents are Han Solo and Leia Organa, so naturally rebelling against them means becoming the next Darth Vader. And I think he has the kind of like vibe of personality of the kind of person that you would expect to be like, yeah, so I'm like a Satanist, but Satanists are actually not that bad. That's kind of the vibe that I got from him.
Shout out to the emo Kylo Ren Twitter account. It is wonderful.
Yes, it's beautiful.
I love it.
Follow it now if you haven't already. What I'm expecting is that Kylo Ren will be very conflicted and very much he'll be tempted by the light side in the same sort of ways that Luke was tempted by the dark side in his story. And I think that is a very, very natural extension of his arc, as it's already been established. And I feel like there's some potential for him to actually redeem himself, but that would probably be kind of disappointing. So let's just say, yeah, he goes to the dark side fully, but all throughout he's like a little bit worried that just maybe the light will seduce him.
Yeah, so I ended up seeing The Force Awakens 3 times. I ended up seeing it with like family, friends, and then on a date, but I'm still really confused about this bridge scene. When I saw it, like, I've had different interpretations of it, like, each time I've seen it. Because one time I was like, oh, like, when I saw Han get onto the bridge, I'm like, he's dead. He's gonna die. He's gonna kill him. But then I saw, like, I wasn't sure if Kylo Ren was sincere when he was talking to Han at first. And it wasn't until he saw that the sun was gone, then he's like, no, I'm too close. I'm going to just go full dark side. Or if it was just all a ruse. What did you guys think?
I think that in conjunction with the line that Poe Dameron says, the line where it says, as long as that there's light, we still have a chance, is, subtle, not so subtle foreshadowing there. But I think exactly to the point of when the darkness creeps in and all that light's gone, Kylo realizes, yeah, I'm gonna stick with darkness. So I think he really was conflicted, because if he's talking to writing in his diary, talking, "Dear Darth Vader helmet, I feel conflicted." I think that's real because that was a scene that was just him. If it was a ruse, I don't think he would have had that moment with the Darth Vader helmet earlier. So I really do believe that he was legitimately feeling that conflict. Maybe he was playing it up a little bit just to be able to make that transition. But I feel like he was, even if he didn't mean it the way that he said it to Han, he did feel conflicted, and he knew that to fully become a Sith, he had to go and kill his dad. Even if he wasn't feeling conflicted the way that he specifically mentioned, it was a necessary step, and he had to kind of lure him in with that and then kill him. So he knew that killing him makes him a Sith, and it was something he'd have to do in the end.
Yeah, I definitely interpreted him as being, on the whole, pretty much completely genuine. Because he's like, there's something I have to do, and I don't know if I'm going to have the strength, right? And I imagine that the intention behind the writing of that line was for Han and maybe even the audience to almost get the impression that what he needs to do is give up the dark side. Well, what we really know to be true and what ends up being true is that what he needs to do and is having trouble with is killing his daddy, old patricide, always a struggle. And he's definitely struggling with that. And I think it's this honesty about, because he is talking to his father. He does recognize him as his father, and he sees the pain in Han. And I think he's being honest and he's being legitimate. And then Han Solo's like, "I will help you, whatever you need." And he's like, "Oh, that's a relief." Stabs.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see if, I'm sure Leia will end up having a scene with Kylo. I'd almost like to see Leia bring him to the light side, but maybe that's just fanciful thinking on my part. But because I see it as genuine, and a lot of people I talk to see it as like, oh, it was a ruse. But it's nice to hear your guys' take on it.
I read one really stupid theory that said that Kylo Ren is an undercover Jedi and Han Solo let himself get Dumbledored, which is stupid.
That's dumb.
It's a stupid theory.
Han doesn't even really mention Kylo.
Yeah, that's on a scale of 1 to smart, that's dumb.
Connor, you had a point about the parallels to The New Hope?
So yeah, it feels very much, this movie, The Force Awakens, is very much a New Hope remix in a very good way. I think it's a perfect way to reintroduce the series, but also give it life with new characters. So superficially is perhaps the most obvious that this New Hope remix idea. I mean, it starts on a desert planet. You find the Falcon in this junkyard. You end up at this alien bar. You have a Death Star parallel. You have, a Death Star planning fight preparation scene parallel. But within that framework, there's they use that familiar framework so well to introduce the unfamiliar, these new characters, and really, despite tying it into the old, making it the movie feel like it's its own, and it's about the new characters more so than the old characters. Rey, Finn, and Poe Dameron being the new power trio, though I still feel like we haven't had as much of Poe Dameron as possibly we should have. Anyway, that's the idea so far.
Yeah, I think they needed to pseudo kill off Poe Dameron so they could have the reveal at the end. But I'm looking forward to Finn and Poe Dameron's buddy copping in the next movie. Mm-hmm. But one thing that I was going to say and I entirely forgot it. That is unfortunate. Oops. Oh, well. Well, it was a good point. Damn it. But the cinematography, in addition to the overarching... Oh, yes, I got it. So to the point of Connor and I, being in the same school and going to some of the same classes, we took a class in ancient Greek history this semester, and one of the people we read was Thucydides, the ancient Greek historian of the Peloponnesian War.
Oh, yeah. I know where you're going with this.
One of his big deals was that history has this pesky habit of repeating itself in certain ways, so that when people are placed in the same situations, they'll act the same way. So the whole, New Hope versus The Force Awakens is very Thucydidean in that we have these, recurring things and how the formulae will kind of twist and turn and be different in each case. I thought was really cool. But after that, I thought that the subtle ways in which they parallel the old movies instead of, overt plot arcs were really cool. Because you have specific cinematography that is meant to parallel older movies. So in the cantina scene, when Rey goes down into that little basement area, it's meant to look like the opening to Episode VI when Luke is going into Jabba's palace. When you have Rey's lightsaber or Luke's lightsaber gets stuck in the snow when she's fighting Kylo Ren, that's meant to look like when Luke is using the Force to pick it up when he's fighting the Yeti thingy.
The Wampa.
Finally, most importantly probably, of the three big ones that come to mind, is when they're on the bridge, Han and Kylo Ren. It's basically a, hey, I'm your father type scene, but of course it's painfully reversed. So it accomplishes something more than if it was just that one scene, because in the context of the older movies, you see how a scene like that could have gone and how it ended up going. And you have this kind of twisting difference of, Vader saying, join me and we'll rule the galaxy, and Han saying, join me and come be my son again. So it's really painful when you kind of think about it emotionally and how it twists around all your perceptions about it based on the older movies. I think it does that fantastically.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are saying that they are really disappointed with, or sometimes even they'll say that they hate The Force Awakens because of how similar it is to A New Hope in many respects. And I don't think the movie is getting enough credit. You can look at a lot of moments and you can see where the inspiration has come from. You can see the beginning desert planet droid with the MacGuffin on it. That's all totally legit. Totally makes sense. And the Death Star, Starkiller Base parallels, those are all real. But I feel like the movie does so much that it's completely original, so much new stuff, and that it does well what it remixes. Like it pulls it off. It pulls off the homage. And I think it deserves more credit than it gets. I really do.
What are some of the examples of things you don't think get enough credit?
Examples of things I did well. First of all, the Finn character was brilliant. The whole idea of this stormtrooper who has defected against the First Order I thought was brilliant and new and interesting. The fact that our main characters, for the most part, are not just the old characters again, that Rey is a very original character and very new and very fresh, and so is Poe Dameron. I think, one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie is on Han's freighter, when, the people are mad at him and they're standing on the opposite ends of the hallway. That was just so much fun, so cool, and I felt like the entire second act, like the stuff that's between the beginning and the end, like I said, were very much retreads of how A New Hope worked. I think the middle was pretty much original stuff for the most part, and I just... Yeah, I don't think all of it was New Hope 2. I don't. A lot of people seem to think so,
yeah.
But I think that those people are just conflating certain parts of it that were maybe egregious in their homage to the original, as if the whole movie was that way. It was not, in my opinion.
I think one of the things that it doesn't get enough credit for, because there was a lot of hype because the movie used so much practical effects, which are great. But I think it also, because of that, it hasn't got enough credit for its computer effects either. Because they're, in many ways, I think some of the best looking characters, best looking scenes that are computer generated, done really well in conjunction with the practical effects. I think one of the moments I think is done really well and is really entertaining, and is I really liked when they first board the Millennium Falcon and they have this chase through the hulks of old ships. That I thought was really clever and probably one of the more compelling starship piloting scenes that we've had for a really long time. I mean, I can't even name any from the last movie to really heavily use computer-generated effects, which are, I mean, the prequels exclusively used computer-generated effects, and it was not a great end product.
It was bad.
Yeah. I think I'd noticed though, watching some CinemaSins of the prequels, especially in the second and third movies, I feel like there's a budget room where they go to have. There's like a room where it's dark and the blinds are drawn, so you can't see outside, and the characters inside are always like 2 or 3 Jedi, and they did that. I feel like they did that exclusively to save the budget, because every other incidental conversation between Jedi and the whole movies are like out in the open with holograms of all the people in the conversation sitting on a table. And that's just like, I just thought that was hilarious when I was going back through that.
The effects in the prequel trilogy were good for the time, but it was kind of a Pyrrhic victory because the effects were good for the time, but they haven't aged well, and the story, I think, suffered for it a lot. Well, it did. You can say that. What I liked about The Force Awakens is the new cast was amazing. I really loved Finn, I loved Rey, and I loved Poe and BB-8 probably way more than I should. It might have been a bit too much fan service for me at a couple of points, but it wasn't the whole thing. It wasn't Superman Returns, because I just remember thinking that was too much. And with the new people, it's not clear-cut who the new Han, Leia, and Luke, or Anakin, Padme, and Obi-Wan are. So I think what they did well is the new trio. And it has its own visual identity. It's not obviously made in the 70s or 80s, and it's not like CGI with a couple people in it. So that's what I thought.
Yeah. Ultimately, I think my overall views on this movie are that this is a J.J. Abrams movie. We all know that J.J. Abrams movies usually play it safe. And I think in a lot of cases, The Force Awakens does play it safe. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's all in all a fun movie and that they needed to play it safe. I definitely think Disney was like, okay, we need a movie that is safe, that is fun, that is nostalgic, that is not too strange or different or new or dramatic or improved in any way. Because there's a lot of ill will towards the Star Wars franchise the last 10 years as a result of the prequels being storytelling disasters. They needed to have a home run. They needed to hit this out of the ballpark in terms of quality. The profits were always going to be high. It could have been worse than the prequels and the profits. It would still do the box office that it did, probably. But they just knew that they needed to make it a good movie if people were going to turn around and come see Episode 8. So what we see is a safe movie, and I definitely think you can tell a lot about what they really want to do going forward by the fact that Rian Johnson is at the helm. Rian Johnson will be writing and directing Episode 8. He will be writing Episode 9. And Rian Johnson's movies are all a bit weird. Movies like Looper, Brick, I think The Brothers Bloom is one of them. They're all movies that are good at establishing rules for the world they exist in and then breaking them in really compelling ways. And we have a lot of reason to expect that Episode 8 of Star Wars will be a weird movie. It will be a movie that is very different from what we have already come to expect of the Star Wars movies of that genre as a whole. And, you know, there are quotes like Lawrence Kasdan, who is basically a writing genius in terms of Star Wars. He wrote, I think, most, if not all, of the original trilogy, and he also co-wrote Episode 7 with Abrams. And he just read the Episode 8 script, and he just said, yeah, guys, it's going to be pretty weird. things are going to get weird, and it's not going to be the Star Wars you're expecting. And I think that's great. I think I'm excited about that. I think with Episode 7 playing it as safe as it is, Episode 8 is going to break the mold. And if anything, it might even go a little too far in that direction. And then Episode 9 can be the, just right that we're all looking for. But I don't think we should expect Episode 8 to be Empire Strikes Back in the same ways that The Force Awakens was A New Hope.
I think
we can be a bit more optimistic about how that's going to turn
Force Awakens
out.
may play it safe. I think I think usually when you say that something played it safe, you almost kind of use it like a blanket term, like, oh, it's at the same level as everything else that plays it safe. But I think it's very valid to say that something can be played safe better or worse. And I think that The Force Awakens is played safe and is still done very well in that. I think that the things that it adheres to from the previous Star Wars is it mostly adheres to the better things. And the things that it really goes off the wall with, I think, are not off the wall. I mean, keeping them playing it safe, I think that they're off the wall enough to not be, nothing, but they're not so crazy as to be kind of bitter. And I think one of those things, actually, for me, although this is probably from the fact that I didn't really get into the expanded universe, but I think that the universe they've set up and the way they've evolved the universe after the end of the original trilogy is really interesting. And I think that, in many ways, is the place where they have the greatest diversity between a safe tack and a really interesting, different tack.
So for the next movie, I'm personally looking forward to the sort of opposing training montages that Ren and Rey will get at the hands of Snoke and Luke, respectively. Side note, I'm personally a fan of the theory that Snoke is really Darth Plagueis, but that's a longer theory that I won't bother to explain.
Darth Binks.
Darth Binks? No. I love the Darth Binks theory. Jar Jar would definitely be dead by this point in the series. And I think we can all rest happily knowing that. But I think I remember reading somewhere that there was supposed to be a Jar Jar skeleton showing up at some point to symbolically kill him off, but that never happened in Episode 7. Anyway, I'm looking forward to, like I said, Rey going full-on Jedi, Ren going full-on Sith. Maybe Rey's little bow staff thing gets an upgrade of some sort, like a laser thing on one end, or maybe a double-bladed lightsaber even. What I'm also hoping to see is a Rey Kenobi reveal. Now, a lot of people think that Rey Skywalker is a winning theory because it seems really obvious, but Darth Vader being Luke's father was not obvious. So I don't think they're going to do something, that straightforward and simple. I think for a couple reasons that Rey Kenobi would be a really great thing to do, and why it will probably happen, in my opinion. I am biased because I really like Obi-Wan. He's my favorite character all the way through, but bear with me. So, first off, Daisy Ridley and John Boyega are both very, very British accented. John Boyega speaks with a neutral Americanish accent in The Force Awakens. Daisy Ridley does not. The only other person to have an accent like Rey's in Star Wars is Alec Guinness, who has the sort of, British but really Coruscanty, they call it, accent, which is one thing right off the bat. Second thing, Rey's first proper use of Force powers was doing a Jedi mind trick. The person who's most well known for doing Jedi mind tricks is Obi-Wan. These aren't the droids you're looking for, and you don't want to sell me your death sticks. So, I think it's cool how Rey's first exposure to the Force properly...
You want to go home and rethink your life.
I want to go home and rethink my life. Was using a Jedi mind trick like that. Then third, Obi-Wan's voice is the voice that Rey hears in her flashback, flash-forward weird thing when she touches Luke's lightsaber. The first line where the guy says Rey is Ben Kenobi saying afraid in Episode 4, but they actually cut it, so he says Rey, and it fits really well. The second part where he says, "These are your first steps," is Ewan McGregor's voice. So it's both Obi-Wan's talking to Rey, which I think is really cool. So then, that's relevant because it's Obi-Wan talking to her in her vision when she is awakened by the Force. Then,
of course, other characters also speak in that vision. I mean, Yoda also has lines in that vision.
But the most, Yoda's there too, but the most out front one is Obi-Wan. So I think that's why I'm thinking that. But then, fourth is when Rey ends up seeing Luke, she holds out his lightsaber to him in much the same way that Obi-Wan did in Episode 4, which I think is cool. And honestly, just going based on what I think would work very well, thematically it's so interesting to have Obi-Wan training Luke, who then goes back and trains Obi-Wan's descendant. That would be cool. And yes, there are gaps in how we got from Obi-Wan to granddaughter Rey, but I feel like that could be explained partially in the third anthology movie, which, as of now, is unannounced. We have Rogue One, Han Solo, and the third one is left blank. Maybe it's an Obi-Wan movie. Because he has all of this backstory between episodes 3 and 4, which we don't really know about, but there's so much that could be told in that movie the same way we're doing with Han Solo. So I think the reason that they haven't announced that one yet is because they want to sort of keep that reveal for when we actually do find out that it is, Rey Kenobi, if that's what it is. Some people think that it's going to be a Boba Fett movie, but he's such a boring, dull character. I don't know why anyone would think that's a good idea. I mean, yeah, he has cool armor, but I mean, that's it. So I love the Rey Kenobi theory.
But of course, Captain Phasma is the Boba Fett of this trilogy. See, I love the Rey Kenobi theory. I think it's great. I hope it turns out to be true. As much as I don't really think it will, I hope we get Rey Kenobi confirmed in Episode 8. Only the thing is that I think The Force Awakens kind of subtly confirmed Rey to be a Skywalker in a way that I don't think a lot of people picked up on. And I haven't seen it discussed anywhere. So if this is like common knowledge already or it's been debunked somehow, please tell me because I don't want to look like an idiot. But I think that the biggest problem with the theory is that there's this exchange that happens with R2-D2 and C-3PO. We all know that as soon as Rey shows up is when R2-D2 actually awakens for the first time. And R2-D2 does something, and C-3PO is like, R2-D2, what have you found? And R2 does his beeps. And C-3PO says, don't call me that. So if you think about that, and you think about what R2-D2 could have possibly been saying as something that he found when Rey arrived, something that C-3PO would interpret as an insult if he heard it being said to him. I found the bastard child of Luke Skywalker. It's been established that R2-D2 wasn't going to wake up until, something to do with Luke because of R2's connection with Luke. Luke being gone was the reason that R2-D2 went into power saving mode or whatever, went into hibernation. The idea that he wakes up when Rey shows up and then says that phrase, potentially, I found the bastard, would seem to be significant evidence in the direction of Rey is a Skywalker, and that is what will, I guess, be the truth. Again, I love the Rey Kenobi theory.
I agree with the I found the bastard thing. I think that makes a lot of sense, but I don't see why it can't be the bastard child of Obi-Wan, because as a sort of Jedi, they're supposed to be celibate, but...
Well, Rey'd have to be the granddaughter, you realize.
Oh, yeah, sorry,
Rey
bastard
be
granddaughter,
Obi-Wan's bastard daughter.
But
it may be, but
there are so many blanks we don't
really have
know.
A bastard granddaughter. I mean, is a bastard granddaughter when...
Let us know in the comments what you all think.
Right.
We're obviously never going to be able to sort this out until the next episode comes out. And even then, maybe it's an episode 9 reveal. Who knows?
Perhaps.
But those are our ideas. Anyone else have anything to add on Star Wars before we wrap up?
Looking for clarification on what the two inter movies are that we know of.
Rogue One.
Rogue One, right? That's this one.
Rogue One.
The heist for the Death Star plans?
And Han Solo.
Han Solo will be nice.
Okay.
Uh-huh. And Rogue One is coming in December of 2016. That's being directed by the guy who made Godzilla, the most recent Godzilla movie, with Felicity Jones starring. It is about how they secured the plans for the Death Star before the events of A New Hope. So we are getting a prequel, literally, again, to the original trilogy.
They're doing the cinematic universe thing again.
The second integral movie, which will happen between episodes 8 and 9, is a Han Solo origin story that is being written and I think directed by Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, who you will recognize from 21 Jump Street and the Lego Movie and a whole host of other fun family comedies. So we can kind of expect a more lighthearted tone out of that movie. The third movie's been a mystery because it was at one point originally announced as a real movie called Red 5. And then that disappeared, and then it was a Boba Fett project. And everyone's kind of still scratching their heads. I don't think we have specific word on what it is. I really want it to be an Obi-Wan movie because I think Ewan McGregor is just perfect casting for young Obi-Wan and was one of the best parts of the prequels. So I'd love to see that. But anyway, yes, Katie, back to you.
Okay. Before we go, I just needed to be a nerd and put this out there. So Starkiller Base, a lot of people, even though it's like brought up in the movie, it's not just another Death Star. A lot of people just say it's another Death Star. What I found interesting about Starkiller Base is that it takes the concept of Darth Vader as far as it could possibly go, because Darth Vader is a human who's been turned into a machine, and Starkiller Base originally was a planet, and it's been turned into a machine.
That's an interesting
comparison. That's really clever.
And
wow.
Yeah.
And I
That's
think
very cool.
Not a lot of people realize that, and then it was just blown up. So, but maybe in episode 9, there's going to be like, there's a second one, and it's even bigger.
Maybe that'll be part of Kylo Ren's story as he tries to emulate Darth Vader, or as he might make himself a bit more of a machine.
Maybe he'll cut off his own hand.
If his face gets real messed up.
You love me now, Grandpa?
Oh, man, he would so do that. Oh, my God, that'll be great.
That would be a that'd be a great scene if they actually did that.
That'd be really grim, actually, because it is a Disney
Awesomely
property
dark.
now, and that's why we have the cinematic universe thing, is because it is a Disney property.
Right.
If somebody can pull off the cinematic universe for Star Wars, though, it will be Disney, because they did it with Marvel, and I don't see anybody else that I think is going to succeed in that anytime soon.
Justice League, I want it to be good, but I just don't think it will be.
I don't think it will be.
I want to talk about why I think that's going to suck, but I can't because we're done here. But we could do a kitchen sink on the DC cinematic universe, and that could be very cool. Perhaps sometime around the time that Batman v Superman.
Let us know if you'd like to see that.
Yeah, definitely. You know what? Shoot us a comment and tell us what kind of stuff you'd like to see just across the board on any of our segments, because there's a lot of stuff that we could talk about in the kitchen sink. We have a lot of, opportunities for great discussion here outside of the Assassin's Creed universe. And lots of stuff to talk about within the Assassin's Creed universe. This episode was mainly about Jack the Ripper, of course. But if there's anything that you would like to see us discuss, definitely shoot a suggestion in the comments, and we will be glad to take a look at whatever it is. I think that is all we have to say for today. Katie, thank you for joining us for this episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's an honor to be included on the first episode.
All social media links that are relevant will be in the description of this video. We hope you enjoyed the episode. We had a great time recording it. We'll hopefully see you in 2 weeks for episode 2. I've been Greg.
I currently am Connor.
And I will continue to be Lawson. Goodbye.